Good morning and welcome to the Professor's Interview Series. Today we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Bruce Tallman. Dr. Tallman is a full-time practitioner of spiritual direction since 2002 and has worked with laity and clergy from every Christian denomination. He has published 2 books for spiritual directors. One of them, Finding Seekers, How to Develop a Spiritual Direction Practice from Beginning to Full-Time Employment, is a bestseller in the field. He is passionate about his mission, which is to help people grow in wisdom and love. He has over 150 articles on spirituality, published in the London Free Press and other newspapers, and is an adjunct faculty for the Hayden Institute for Spiritual Directors Training. From 1988 until 2002, Dr. Tallman was the director of 2 religious education centers for the Roman Catholic Diocese of London, Ontario. He holds a Doctor of Ministry degree in spiritual direction and counseling from the Graduate Theological Foundation, which is affiliated with the Gregorian Institute in Rome and Oxford University in England. Dr. Tallman has been married for many years to his wife, Grace, works as a mental health counselor, mental health professional. Together, they have 3 wonderful adult children. Bruce has served as board member of Christian Spiritual Directors since its inauguration. When I was speaking to Bruce prior to the call this morning or prior to the show, I learned that in his practice as spiritual director, he has prepared over 4,000 young couples for marriage. So his counseling has also been counseling and direction for young people preparing for marriage. What a wonderful gift to the world, and how enriching it must be to work with people, young people getting ready for married life. Please join me to welcome to the program this morning, Dr. Bruce Tallman. Dr. Tallman, thank you very much for joining us. This is an honor.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we've waited a bit of time, so it's something I've really looked forward to, and very grateful that you're with us. You told me before we went live, but where are you exactly now? Where are you?
In London, Ontario, which is about 2 hours west of Toronto by car.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're kind of right in the middle of the 3 of the Great Lakes.
Beautiful. And do you get to the lakes? Do you?
Oh yeah, all the time.
You're a lucky man then. And your environment is rural, or you're on the suburbs or city, or?
Yeah, London has about 400,000 people. We're kind of in a suburb in Southwest London. Yeah.
Well, it's great that you could make the time to join us this morning. It's really our blessing, our good luck.
It's my blessing too, believe me.
Thank you. Yeah, we've had a little time to get to know one another, and I've learned about a life of enormous amount of service that constitutes your whole life and your daily life, and the demands that come on you. But the main thing, and of course, every life, we could discuss forever and all kinds of things about the wonderful work you do, and maybe it'll come up. But the main thing we're here is to highlight and bring to the public attention your most recent publication, God's Ecstatic Love, and this it's bringing into the present a classical spiritual treatise.
That's right. Yes.
But in your case, I get the sense that it's not done as a matter of kind of arid academic undertaking. It's a passion. It grows out of your life's.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So it grows out of. I grew up in Canada, in the United Church of Canada. I'm going to kind of give you the whole notes of my spiritual journey, because it's pretty long and convoluted. So my parents were heavily involved in the United Church of Canada, which is like the United Church of Christ in the States. And I attended until I was 13, and I was confirmed at 13. And then, as one United Church minister said, confirmation is kind of like graduation from the church. So I stopped going, and I was kind of just, I guess I still believed in God. Anyway, a significant event happened when I was about 17, and that is that I had a personal interview with Billy Graham, Reverend Billy Graham, a one-to-one meeting with him. And at the end of the meeting, this is just before one of his crusades, and he wouldn't even use the term crusade anymore, wouldn't be politically correct. But anyway, at the end of the meeting, we both stood up and he shook my hand. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Bruce, we're expecting great things from you." I mean, he probably says that to every young man he meets, but this scared the daylights out of me. And I don't know if you know the story of Jonah in the Bible, where Jonah tries to run away from God. So I tried to run away from God. I had started university, and I was in a sociology of religion class, and I did an essay exposing how Billy Graham crusades emotionally manipulate people. And so, yeah, and then I was in an anthropology class, and we're studying the theory of evolution, and so I kind of fancied myself to be an atheist for a while. And yeah, that went on for quite a while. When I graduated, I had two friends who received a grant from the Canadian government to do a study of Aztec, Inca, and Mayan ruins. And so they were given this grant to do the film work of these ancient religious sites. And they needed somebody who could do the still photography. So they took me along with them. And I should say that before this, I was working at a jail and as a counselor, and there was a lot of drugs floating around, and me and my roommate decided to try out some of these drugs. I mean, nothing really heavy. And so when we were traveling all through Mexico and Central America and Latin America, we were constantly, visiting these religious sites. I mean, the only thing left of a lot of these civilizations is the temples. And so, and I don't know if most people know this, but there's in Mexico, there are pyramids that are bigger than the pyramids in Egypt. I mean, there was one that looked like a mountain, like a small mountain. And on top of it, I mean, vegetation had grown over it, but on top of it was a Catholic church. But this church was built on top of this pyramid. And anyway, so when we got back to Canada, we spent 11 months in Latin America. When we got back to Canada, I was kind of interested in religion. And the people who me and my roommate used to do drugs with were getting into heavier drugs, and I knew I didn't want to go down that road. And I thought there must be some kind of natural way to get high. Well, this was in the 1960s, and I was a big fan of the Beatles, and the Beatles were a big fan of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so I studied, I took transcendental meditation with the International Meditation Society. I learned yoga. I was actually teaching yoga and meditating, and that was really good for me. But then I got into graduate school in psychology, and I found I couldn't get in. I was so busy. I was working full time, and I was in graduate school, and I working on a master's in psychology, and I just found that I couldn't get into meditating anymore. I was just too uptight all the time, and a lot of the professors, it seemed like, were atheists. And so I switched into religious studies. And I switched into religious studies because I'd met my wife, and she was kind of a fundamentalist evangelical Mennonite. And the first Christmas we were together, as a gift, she gave me a Bible. And I thought, what kind of gift is this, and like, yeah. So I had never read the Bible, and her parents didn't want me to marry her because I wasn't a born again Christian, you see. So just to impress them, I took a course on the Old Testament, and the professor was horrible. He plagiarized everything, I found out later. But as part of the course, you had to actually open the Bible and read it and, do some writing on it. And so I opened it at Proverbs, and I was blown away by the wisdom in Proverbs and the Psalms. And, it just, the Bible's been, ever since, has been a daily, Bible reading thing for me. Anyway, my wife Grace and I started going to Protestant churches. We bounced around from one church to another. We moved from Winnipeg to Toronto, and so I could complete my master's degree in religious studies. And when we were there, we found a church that was called the Toronto United Mennonite Church. And we thought, well, this would be perfect. It'll be like, a combination of the United Church of Canada and the Mennonite Church. And what we found when we got there was that every second person in the congregation had a PhD, and God seemed to be an embarrassment. They were so liberal that God was almost never mentioned. I mean, the sermons were, if you can call them that, they were kind of secular sermons about defensive driving, things like that. God was almost never mentioned. And so we got up one Sunday morning before going to church, and we said to each other, if we hear another secular sermon, we're out of this church, we're leaving this church. And so that morning, the minister started his sermon with the words, "This is just another secular sermon." And, and so that was it. So we were out of that church. We tried the Baptist church, we tried the Nazarene church. We moved back to Winnipeg. We were bouncing around from one church to another. And just down the road from where we lived was a Catholic church. And so an interesting thing is, while we were living in Toronto, Grace went to a book sale. She brought home a book called Christ Among Us. She didn't know that it was a Catholic catechism. And so I started reading this book, Christ Among Us, and I thought, well, I agree with a lot of this theology. You see, it's very broad and open. And so then, I popped into this Catholic church, and they had a program where, you could learn about the Catholic faith, and at Easter, you could join the church if you wanted to. So I thought, well, I'll take this course. And it turned out that this course was using the same book, Christ Among Us, this catechism. And I'd already agreed with most of the teachings. And so at Easter, I joined the church, and my wife was kind of shocked. And anyway, to make a long story short, I became Catholic. My priest knew I had a master's in religious studies, and he figured that, okay, this guy's a convert to Catholicism. Before that, he was a Protestant. He must know everything about the Bible. Well, actually, in my religious studies master's degree, the only course I took on the Bible was this Old Testament course. And, I really didn't know much about the Bible, but fortunately, the Diocese of London had started their own Bible study course called the Journey Bible Study, which became a worldwide course, actually. I think 50,000 people around the world took this course. And so my priest put me in charge of this Journey Bible Study program, and he kept adding more and more stuff. And I was already working full time in social services, and it was like I had this almost full-time volunteer job with the church, and I started fantasizing about, wouldn't it be nice if I had one paid job somewhere, working for a diocese? And so I saw this ad for, they were looking for a director of the Christian Renewal Center in the Diocese of London, Ontario, not London, England. And so I applied, and they hired me. And so I did adult religious education for 14 years for the diocese. In 1999, I started sensing a calling to be a spiritual director or spiritual counselor. And so I thought, well, I'll just take a weekend course, a couple of workshops on how to be a spiritual director, and I'll hang out my shingle and people will flock to me. See, that's a naive idea I had about how this is going to work. Of course, it didn't work that way. And somehow I ended up in a Doctor of Ministry program in spiritual direction at the Graduate Theological Foundation, which is on the campus of Notre Dame University. And I managed to get through that. I graduated.
US or a Notre Dame in the US?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I graduated in 2003 with my Doctor of Ministry in Spiritual Direction. But before that, while I was still working for the diocese, I was building a spiritual direction practice, and I had enough directees, people taking spiritual direction, that I figured I could leave my job with the diocese and do this full time. So in 2002, I left my job with the diocese, and I mean, as of August 12th, I'm going to be starting my 21st year as a spiritual director. I now work mainly with clergy, some lay people. And as I was saying before we started the interview, Frank, I do a lot of marriage preparation, and I've worked with thousands of couples preparing them for marriage, which is a great privilege and also a lot of fun because, they're in a really good space, and yeah, it's just fun to work with them. So, so that's been my spiritual journey. And so I converted to Catholicism in 1983 with rose-colored glasses. Now, those rose-colored glasses have been totally knocked off. And I work a lot with Anglican, Episcopalian, we call them Anglican clergy. And I sometimes think about becoming an Anglican, or maybe going back to my United Church roots, or just, not going to church, period. Because I feel like sometimes people don't just suffer for the church, they suffer from the church. And, I don't know if you know Richard Rohr. Do you know Richard Rohr? Yeah. So I no longer consider myself a Roman Catholic. I consider myself a Rohrman Catholic. Richard Rohrman Catholic. Anyway, so I've been his disciple for like 30 years, and he's what keeps me in the Catholic Church, in spite of, I'm not in favor of not ordaining women as priests and bishops. I think we should be ordaining women as priests and bishops. There's been the clergy sex scandals. There's been in Canada, recently in the past year, there's been the discovery of all these graves at residential schools.
Yeah.
And, that was kind of like almost the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
So I consider myself, kind of a fringe Roman Catholic. I've always been interested in Buddhism, and, I started off, after the trip through all these Latin American temples and, religious sites, interested in Hinduism with Maharishi, and, but I'm interested in Buddhism. I do Tai Chi every day. And so, anyway, that's kind of my spiritual journey.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. I'll call you Bruce. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's most fascinating. And I guess it has to be said, every biography, I'm sure, must be genuinely fascinating. But this one, yours, is remarkable to listen to. And just as I listened, I wondered, what allowed you to have a personal interview with Billy Graham? Why was that happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. My dad was working for this businessman who was running this fairly large insurance company. And my dad's boss was a devout Baptist. He was responsible for organizing Billy Graham to come to Winnipeg and give a crusade, you see. And I happened to be reading a book about Billy Graham, at the time. And my dad said, well, would you like to meet him? And so I said, sure, that'd be amazing. So my dad arranged it through his boss. That's
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
So you were in your late teens, you were late high school or something like that at the time?
17. Yeah.
And but oddly enough, or believe it or not, I went to school with his son Franklin. I went to
really?
high school with him. Yeah.
Okay.
And also I attended a number of the school I went to was a classical evangelical Christian boys boarding school.
Okay.
And it was preeminent. It was the preeminent Christian boys boarding school, so where Billy would send his son. So I went to a number of the crusades and stuff like that. And I think he more or less stands up. His biography holds.
Yeah.
And God bless him for that. It's no easy.
Yeah.
It's kind of if you're religious, you'd say the devil is trying to get you every moment or something like that.
Oh yeah.
You made it through. And then you said later on you wrote was it an essay or a term paper or something of Billy Graham's his kind of manipulative schemes and tactics. Did that grow at all out of your encounter eye to eye, or is it just because you had met him, or?
Yeah, like I said, I was trying to run away from God. He scared me by saying, we're expecting great things of you. I thought it was like too much responsibility, so it grew out of that. And, we had to write some kind of essay on religion for this sociology of religion class.
Okay. So it's a little bit where I see. That was one of the things that needed to be negated, that what happened when he told you that, or something like that. Got it. Interesting. And then this was it archaeological or what had you in the Central America or Mexico? Was it employment, or I missed that part of it?
We weren't employed, but we were given a grant by the federal government to do, and I'm not sure why I think it was, but some branch of the government, some cultural branch, to do a study of Aztec and Mayan and Inca ruins. And so, we were traveling for 11 months. Every day we're going to these ruins, and these ruins were religious ruins. I mean, religion was the center of these cultures for hundreds of years. And that really dawned on me. Like I remember when we first got to Mexico City and I climbed Teotihuacan. I don't know if you know Teotihuacan, but it's this massive pyramid just outside of Mexico City. And I got up in the top of the pyramid. It was early in the morning. My friends wanted to film things before tourists started arriving. And I'm up there and I'm kind of meditating. I'm in a state of peace, and down below my friends, Don and John, are fighting over, I could hear them fighting over how to do this film. They fought the whole 11 months. And they were always trying to get me on their side. And I was kind of always just trying to stay at arm's length, from this.
You thought you'd be safe up on the pinnacle of that pyramid, but sound rises.
Yeah.
And you were involved in the filming and editing and narrative creation of it, or what was your job?
Really just the still pictures.
Okay, that's what you were doing there.
They were doing the movie film. I was doing the still films.
Okay.
Or still photography, not film.
Do the fruits of that expedition exist, or did it become a televised or documentary?
It was televised on the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the national TV program channel, on Sunday morning at about 7 a.m. And so I don't know if anybody actually ever watched it. And then I think they just took our film and archived it. And I don't even know, if it's still possible to access it. But
Was
But
it thrilling and exciting, or there's my work, or was it great? Even if it was,
yeah,
the hour was odd, but was it exciting?
yeah, it was. I mean, the excitement was just visiting all these, religious sites, but yeah, seeing it all in film was. Don, one of my friends, edited the whole thing and prepared it to be shown on
Nice.
TV. So yeah.
Now, when you became Catholic, did
Yeah.
your wife remain in her root tradition? Did she follow? Did
Yeah.
they both become?
Yeah, she was Mennonite, and we kind of made an agreement. Like, she was attending the Nazarene church, the Church of the Nazarene, and they had this Bible study program. And so she said, and I was leading this Journey Bible study, Catholic Bible study program. And I said, well, if you agree to take the Catholic Journey Bible study program, I will agree to take the Nazarene Bible study program with you. So we did that, and Grace got to know Catholic teachings and realized that a lot of the stuff she had learned about Catholicism was kind of inaccurate. And so 4 years later, she joined the Catholic Church. And finally, we could get her kids baptized, because Mennonites don't baptize children, so they baptize adults. So our kids were, baptized at the age of 8 and 5 in the Catholic Church, which is unusual.
Yeah.
Usually babies are baptized.
Right.
Anyway, and I think Grace just joined because she wanted us all to be able to go to church together, you see. And she had learned as a fundamentalist that the man was the head of the household, and the wife should do what the man wants, you see. So she kind of joined for not the best reasons, but just so we could all go to church together.
A little bit as a kind of manifesting that spiritual that biblical injunction as she understood it, in part.
Yeah, that exactly.
Yeah.
So then we all went to church together until Cardinal Ratzinger became Pope, and that was sort of the final straw for Grace. And she left the Catholic Church when Ratzinger became Pope Benedict, and she has never gone back. And so I still go to the Catholic Church weekly, but when I joined, there were all kinds of sort of things pointing in that direction, that I should join this church, whereas she just joined so we could all go to church together. But because of the sex scandals and everything else, she became more and more disgusted with the Catholic Church. And so she then tried the Presbyterian Church, and then tried the Unity Church, and now she pretty much doesn't go at all. But she's a very, very spiritual person. I mean, very deep, very compassionate. She's, on top of being a crisis mental health counselor, she's a grief counselor. She was, back when she was in the Catholic Church, she was a Catholic chaplain for a while at a veterans hospital here in London. Yeah. And so it's been a convoluted journey for her, but she just believes in compassion now. I mean, she believes in God. We pray together, but she's not really impressed with any Christian denomination, and yeah.
That's very interesting. It's very interesting. Unexpectedly, as we chat, it's kind of like the burden on contemporary and conscientious Christians to find the community that holds sufficiently acceptable, or something like that. It's an interesting kind of biographical account of what must be part of the contemporary Christian experience.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the religious orders in the Catholic Church, I don't know if I would still be Catholic. Like the Sisters of St. Joseph here in London are very strong, very progressive. And they've kept me in the church. Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan, has kept me in the church. I mean, I don't know if you know Teilhard de Chardin.
Yes.
But he was a Jesuit, and he kind of helped Catholicism in particular deal with the theory of evolution. And so it's the religious order of priests, Thomas Merton, who I'm sure you're familiar with. These are the guys that have kept me Catholic, really. Those are the guys I study. And there's also lots of, Ilia Delio, who's I think she's a Franciscan, and Joan Chittister. These are women religious who also have helped me to stay in the church.
Yes. So maybe it's the case that each person that describes some affiliation of theirs, whether it's political or an art community or even a religion, should not have to have that mean that I fully affirm the whole of the institution. I think that if we just heard or faced each other like that, people wouldn't have to leave groups that much. All you need is a second sentence. I'm a Catholic, and the hearer should say that tradition and spiritual path was helped that person find a place to do what he needed to do to become a good human being. That's what that sentence means. And then the next thing should just be curiosity. What about it? What about the institution still sounds good or still affirms? And I've heard this. I wish we were more conversational rather than a simple utterance, meaning I represent and defend everything you may have ever heard or felt about this group or that. And especially politically these days, that's a curse on us that we're not allowed a second sentence. Everyone just paints you whole with a single identifier. It's interesting because when we call ourselves something, it means that a lot of our lives had a place, had some words of guiding us through the uncertainty of trying to get through life properly. That's what it should say or mean, and there should you should always have some gratitude for its help along the way, and that's why in ideal situations it would be harder to leave long-standing traditions or birth traditions or something like that.
Culture has a tremendous effect on people, and also, I'm interested in Islam, and I'm sure if you grew up in an Islamic culture, you're probably going to end up being a Muslim, because culture just has it shapes, and there's many different sort of varieties of Islam. I particularly like Sufism, because the Sufis are kind of the ecstatic lovers of God, That's why I'm attracted to Sufism. I like, Rumi and so on. Because they're ecstatic lovers of God.
It's very true. I've done a lot of interfaith work over the course of my career and life, and there's a subsection or branch or wing of interfaith pursuits that's purely driven by the mystics. And they naturally know each other well.
And there's probably a lot more similarity between a Christian mystic, a Muslim mystic, a Buddhist mystic, and a Hindu mystic than there is between, say, a Christian and a totally secular atheist. Atheists also, as one of my friends said, maybe atheists just worship God under a different name, maybe the name of justice, or humanitarianism,
Well said. I believe that also.
As Richard Rohr said, he wrote a book, The Universal Christ, and I believe the universal Christ is everywhere, and you can find the universal Christ in every other major religion, or in people who have no religion at all. As long as they're being loving, kind, wise people, and God is in them, because God is love and God is wisdom and God is peace and joy and all those wonderful qualities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's kind of what might be called a kind of cosmic incarnationalism or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah. And it adds Christ into it. It allows Christ to be embraceable by in traditions that are not particularistically Christian per se. Yeah. It's very good.
So I mean, if God is love, peace, joy, wisdom, I mean, wherever you find love, peace, joy, wisdom, you're finding God, and if an atheist is a loving, wise person, I mean, God is in that person, whether they acknowledge God, there's a God or not,
Yeah.
I think the only difference between atheists and believers is that believers are walking towards the light without any, blindfold on, whereas atheists maybe are walking towards the light, but they're wearing a blindfold. They don't see God and everything. And the goal of human life is to be divinized, to be full of God, in my opinion. It's not just to be a good person. It's much more than that. It's to be a saint, and there's saints. There's saints in every major world religion. I mean, these are holy men and women, So, I would say they're participating in the universal Christ, whether they acknowledge Christ as God or not, So I think Christians, if, I wrote my book, God's Ecstatic Love, partly because I think there's, there's people with sort of a very narrow theology. It's like they're wearing blinders and, but they're very passionate about their narrow theology. And then there's other people who have a very broad theology. It's almost so broad. It's almost like, they don't know what they believe and they're not passionate at all. And Jesus said the great commandment is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Strength means will. So, love God with all your passion, intellect, soul, and will. So I think I'm becoming more and more convinced that the world's biggest problem isn't climate change. It's what is really needed is adult religious education. Where you're open to learning from other religious traditions. You're not anti-science. You're not anti-intellectual. You're spiritual. You're rooted in whatever tradition you need to be rooted in. I mean, the Dalai Lama said, if you dig 10 shallow wells, you'll never hit the underground river. So get, centered in one tradition, go really deep in it, and you will come to the underground stream, which connects all the other, wells, all the other religions. So, and I think it's the mystics that connect, they can connect with each other through, I mean, I think the basis of interreligious dialogue is to start with the premise that God is mystery and God is ineffable. And as St. Augustine said, if you think you understand God, it's not God who you understand, So let's start off with a little humility, not like we have God in our back pocket. We know all about God and other people don't, we all should start with mystery. God is mystery, and, be humble and open to learning from other traditions. And you can enrich your own tradition by learning from other traditions.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be enemies.
Right. It always enriches your own tradition the more and more you learn from others. It's right. a beautiful paradox. It's one of the sweetest of all paradoxes, really.
I agree.
His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, one of the beauty of him is how close to one he is between what he says and how he lives. It's an enormously a huge accomplishment or inheritance on his part. And I was
Yeah.
just going to say, when I hadn't heard this, you dig, what was it, a dozen shallow wells or whatever the
Yeah.
quote.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I know the story of a disgruntled Catholic coming to him and seeking to enter into the tradition of the Tibetan Buddhism. And the Dalai Lama
Yeah.
absolutely refused him and asked him where he
Yeah.
was from
Yeah.
and sent him back to
Yeah.
go continue in his tradition.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
like insufficient or shallow religious leaders would excitedly score the big plum, we got this guy and, he came to
Yeah.
the true faith, but Dalai Lama
Yeah.
just sent him right back home, which is so faithful to these kind of aphorisms like you just described about the
Yeah.
shallow wells. He didn't want to harm the chances of that particular fellow, even though
Yeah.
he knew his own traditions are perfect for bringing people to their heights if they're practiced right. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a nice story.
Yeah.
So the book, how long ago, God's Ecstatic Love, and the
Yes.
publisher again, please.
The publisher is Apocryphal Press. It's an independent press, so it's not a self-published book. But one of my previous books, Archetypes for Spiritual Direction, was with Paulus Press. And what I learned from the big presses is that you do 90% of the work and get 10% of the royalties. They do 10% of the work and get 90% of the royalties. So I wanted to go with an independent press. My previous book to this one, Finding Seekers, I also published with Apocryphal Press, and it's kind of a bestseller in the field of spiritual direction. I think probably maybe a third to a half of all the spiritual directors in the world have read that book. But this new book, this is the cover, and I don't know if you can read that, but
it looks good on screen. Yeah, beautiful.
The subtitle is Transform Your Life with a Spiritual Masterpiece. Now, the spiritual masterpiece is not my book. I think I wrote a good book, but the spiritual masterpiece is St. Francis de Sales' treatise on the love of God. And so I'm doing a 21st century commentary on it because it was published in 1616. In 2016, I happened to, pick it up and start reading it. And I thought, wow, somebody should do like a 21st century update on this book, because there's been a lot that's happened. So exactly 400 years after it was published, I picked it up and I thought, well, in the past 400 years, there's been a lot of changes, like, modern science and, biblical criticism. We've had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, 2 world wars, the internet. There's the new atheists. There's people now, a lot of people who are spiritual but not religious. There's stuff that Francis de Sales couldn't even imagine. So I thought this book needed an intellectual updating, but it's also a devotional book. And so it's meant to appeal, to people's hearts and their minds. And pretty much everybody who reads it says that, they feel like it increased their love of God, and deepened their understanding of God and so on. So my goal is, partly, just to help people draw closer to God. That's the reason I wrote it.
Very good.
It's considered to be, one of the spiritual classics in Christianity, but, on the level of the Cloud of Anointing and the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis and the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, but nobody's really heard about the treatise on the love of God. So I thought, a 21st century update would be good. So
yes, indeed.
That's why I wrote it. So
I thank you for sending it to me, and I really enjoyed reading it and the spirit of it as well. what was I going to ask? Oh, do you want to say a quick word about De Salles, just for the casual here? Everyone can
Sure.
go look him up, but just tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was a bishop in Switzerland, and the Pope sent him there because Switzerland had become very, very, Calvinist. I mean, John Calvin, converted a lot of people from the Catholic Church to Calvinism.
Yes.
And so the Pope sent Francis de Sales to Switzerland to try and win people back. And he did that mainly through his writing. He wrote a book called Introduction to the Devout Life. That was his first major work. And that book, Introduction to the Devout Life, I mean, it still sells today after, hundreds of years. I mean, how many books do that?
Yeah.
But it was a very gentle, sweet book, and it did bring people back to the faith. And so that's, and he was a bishop, a mystic, a saint, and eventually, was, came to be considered a doctor of the church. So that a doctor of the church means that he's very sound theologically.
Yeah.
And
Bruce, who was his pope, and where was he immediately prior to being sent to Geneva in response to a crisis situation?
Yeah. Well, he was French, and he and Saint Jean de Chantal formed a couple of religious orders, really. One of them was the precursor to the Sisters of Saint Joseph. So he was in France, and the Pope. I'm not sure which Pope it was actually. It's kind of slipping my mind right now, but I know that's why he was sent to Switzerland, because he was gaining a big following in France.
Okay.
And it was kind of part of the Counter-Reformation. I mean, the Reformation was Protestantism breaking away from Catholicism.
Yes.
And then the Counter-Reformation was trying to win Catholics back to the church. So that was mission he was given.
But also to improve oneself for why that happened in the first place, to fix in part what the whole quote unquote rebellion was about in a certain way. It, or was it more just to bring them back, do you think?
I think I mean, the Reformation probably was necessary, because the Catholic Church had maybe become too rigid and too law governed. And so, Martin Luther was a Catholic monk. I mean, I think it's important to remember that. He was trying to reform. He wanted to reform the church. He didn't want to start a new church. Correct. Originally. But there was a lot of politics involved with, Martin Luther, and I mean, anyway, it just ended up being a breakaway movement. And I love Protestantism. I think it's very creative, and I have Protestant directees, clergy that I work with. And my book was actually edited by 7 clergy persons from 6 different denominations. And some of them were my directees, some were, just personal friends. But when I wrote the book, I thought, well, I should get some theological, from different traditions. And so I hope the book can appeal to any Christian, or actually anybody who wants to draw closer to God,
I think it does do that. It doesn't seem like it's a denominational piece by any means. So you've accomplished that. I wonder if you can, so in a certain way, it's kind of like, what would it be called? The quadricentennial, or something like a celebration of this great spiritual work on its 400th anniversary. A little bit, not quite. When did the book come out finally?
It was 1616. It was published.
His and yours?
Yeah, it was two Well, I started working on it in 2016. My book was published in 2021.
Okay,
It
good.
took 5 years because my editors, these 7 clergy persons, kept giving me feedback, and I kept having to revamp the book and revamp the book. I think I revamped it about somewhere between 7 and 9 times, you know. It just, yeah.
You asked for it, right?
Yeah, right. Be careful what you ask for.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, but yeah, I think it is very ecumenical, and yeah, it, you know, I've had people say anybody on the right or the left could read this book and find value in it, you know, and
So
yeah,
it's
and I followed the same format as Francis de Sales' treatise. His treatise is actually 12 mini books, and they're actually chapters, but you know, he calls them book 1, book 2, up to book 12. So I followed the same format, and you know, more or less the same chapter titles, and you know, so it's and 20% of the book is quotes from the original treatise, but I used a translation that was before 1923. Anything before 1923 is in the public domain, and you can quote as much as you want, and there's no copyright issues with that. After 1923, things, you know, you run into copyright issues. So 20% of my book is quotes from the original treatise, and it's packed full of scripture quotes and my own reflections, you know, based on all these different people I've studied. I mean, Richard Rohr comes into it a lot. Yeah, the Universal Christ and so on. But yeah, it's been a real labor of love. It's been, you know, a challenge.
yeah, that's both congratulations and thank you for that. You know, you really endeavored to do something for many people in creating this book, and bore the weight of the demands and the pressure to do it. So people should be grateful to you, and also should get it and read it, because it isn't just merely a book on religion or on a past religious figure. It's guidance for living day to day in our time now, and for both small and big issues as well, which you bring into the book. The challenge,
I try and
political challenges of the day, and
I didn't want it to be so heavenly bound that it was no earthly good, you know. So I include a lot about social justice in there. I mean, the great commandments are to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then Christ said the second commandment is like the first, and that is love your neighbors as yourself. Well, you can't love your neighbors as yourself if you're not interested in social justice, you know. I mean, social justice, as the great Protestant theologian Reinhold Niebuhr said, social justice is the proper distribution of love throughout society, you know. So it's, the book has a lot in it about social justice and loving your neighbor as well as loving God. And I hope it helps with church renewal, because you know, I don't know how it is in the States, but in Canada, a lot of churches are losing members, and particularly after the pandemic, a lot of people have just decided, oh, you know, I didn't go to church during the pandemic, I don't need to go to church anymore.
I survived.
And I think if we lose, you know, churches, I mean, it's going to be like a great, what's the word, hollow point in our society, you know. I mean, the culture has a Christian background, and you know, if we lose that, I don't know what we're gonna replace it with.
I agree with you. I think life will become more brutish. And also the citizens will become more vulnerable without the churches. I think these are two real dangers, and I'm really grateful that you've kind of sought to awaken a core point, the core of it all, which is the love of God.
That is the core. I mean, you know, as somebody said, the great commandments, Jesus said the great commandments are pretty much the essence of the faith. I mean, the law and the prophets hang upon these great commandments of loving God and loving others. I mean, everything else is commentary by comparison.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
Yeah. So this is what I think is, 21st century commentary on the greatest work of one of the greatest saints, Francis de Sales, on the greatest topic, how to love God. That's what it's about. So, yeah. So, yeah, the core of Christianity, which is the historical background to our whole culture, is, loving God. I mean, Christ said that, that the law and the prophets hang upon these great commandments of loving God and loving others as you love yourself, and everything else, in my opinion, is commentary, everything
That's
else.
right.
So we got to go back to the basics here. And, part of the reason I wrote the book is that because I don't think I know too many people who are loving God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. I mean, I know very few people who I think would be classified as modern day saints,
Mm.
So I think we need to discover the mystical tradition of, Christianity, which, like I said before, can relate to the mystical tradition of any other tradition. If we start off with the premise that God is ineffable and God is the great mystery, and, let's be humble here and realize we don't know everything about God. Maybe these other people know a lot about God too.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. That's very right. Yeah. When we have a couple of minutes. When you
Sure.
mentioned mystery, I was thinking that mystery, you can know a lot about anything and preserve mystery.
Yeah.
So the statement God is a mystery shouldn't function as, don't ask me, just believe. It's not fideism. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, in a certain way, I've been married 50 years, and I say my wife is a mystery. You say, what?
Yeah.
You don't know anything about? I know a lot,
Yeah.
but I'll never know. She's infinitely to be discovered, and I think that's what you call the ineffable. It's not
That's
the
right.
whole thing is just, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that part of the?
Yeah, exactly. The great thing about God being ineffable is there's always more to learn,
Yeah.
And
But our path, we can learn a lot. We can develop
yeah,
an intimate relationship and be quite familiar,
yeah,
and
yeah,
yet not know simultaneously.
yeah, that's right. So, Richard Rohr talks about always having a beginner's mind.
Yeah, that's a beautiful phrase.
Yeah. So you're open to awe and wonder, and you're a
Perfect.
lifelong learner.
Yeah. I guess you might draw that from the as a child from Jesus, unless we be like children, the beginner's mind. Yeah.
So again, I think this is I don't know if we got cut out when the sirens went by, but again, I think this is a commentary on the greatest work of one of the greatest saints, Francis de Sales, on the greatest topic, how to love God. I mean, that's what the book is about, and I hope it helps people and maybe brings about church renewal, because in North America and Europe, I think Christianity is, in some ways, it's become toxic. In some cases, people have a very narrow theology. So they may love God with all their heart, but they're not using their mind a lot. And then there's other people who are loving God with all their mind, but their heart isn't really engaged, and they don't have any passion. So my goal was hopefully that this would help people have a passionate and intellectual faith, which is what adult religious education is really all about. And like I said, I think that's almost a greater need than climate change, because I think the whole anti-vaccination thing is really because, starting with Darwin, people didn't trust science. Anyway, that'd be a for a whole nother podcast. But people have a distrust of science, and that's led to the anti-vax movement. And but I think it all started back with Darwin's theory of evolution, and which didn't seem to jive with the Bible. But that's kind of
that's it.
So we need to overcome fundamentalism, is what I'm saying. And adult religious education is the way to overcome fundamentalism. And
right, there has to be the people have to feel free to have intellectual courage, even while embracing a profound and deep commitment to life of faith. That I think your book has a lot of that desire and purpose in it, and it accomplishes it too. I think combining your own passion with this treatise that is, as you say, a timeless classic. So well, this has been a very edifying conversation for me personally, and I'm sure it will be for our listeners as well. Bruce, I hope we can talk again soon, and wish a lot of blessings to your life and your work going forward.
Same to you, Frank. I think you're doing wonderful work.
Thank you so much.
You're a real blessing, and I just appreciate your friendly approach to these conversations, because I've been on other podcasts where you feel like you're under attack, sort of. And, no, that's not your style at all. So you really have made me feel at home and welcome, and I really appreciate your approach and what you're trying to do to help different traditions understand each other. That's so important.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Look forward to see you again sometime soon.
Okay, great, Frank.
Bye. Thank you.
Same to you. Bye for now.